living longer, living healthier, living better than ever before. Welcome to Mountain Pacific's Healthy Living for Life, a weekly series that gives you the information, education, and expert insight you need to become an active participant in today's ever-changing healthcare climate. Here now is today's program host.
Well, it's hard to believe, but it's true. It's flu season again, and experts predict this one could be a doozy. So what can you do to keep from getting sick, especially as we head into the holidays and family get-togethers? Welcome to Healthy Living for Life, a show dedicated to helping you do just that. I'm your host, Beth Brown, and today we are talking flu, COVID, and pneumonia. Oh my, stay with us. Welcome back to Healthy Living for Life. Joining us this morning is the infamous Dr. Doug Kunzweiler, Chief Medical Officer at Mountain Pacific Quality Health, and thanks so much, as always, for being here with us.
Well, thanks for asking.
Of course. So let's dive right in and talk about this flu season. What do we need to know this year?
Well, I think what we need to know is, as you alluded to, it's going to be bad. We had very little flu last year. In 2020, we had almost none, so our immune systems haven't seen flu for a couple of years. And we are no longer practicing masking and social distancing the way we were before. And when we look at how the Southern Hemisphere fared last summer, since that was their winter, they had a bad flu season. In Australia, they saw almost 3 times what they normally would see.
Wow.
So putting all those things together, experts believe that it's going to be a bad influenza season this year.
Okay, and how long does the flu season typically last, and when would we consider the peak flu season?
In our Northern Hemisphere, it usually starts in about October, sometimes late October, early November, and runs through May. Now you can see occasional cases throughout the entire year, but that's when we see most of it, and it peaks usually in the dead of winter around January, February.
Okay, and we know the best defense is a good offense, which is getting vaccinated.
Absolutely.
When should we do that? And then how long does it take for the shot to kick in?
Well, the sooner you do it, the better, we think, this year. Not only are we predicting it will be a worse year, but we think it's going to start a little bit earlier. So I typically recommend people get their immunization the end of October. If you haven't gotten it yet, by the time this airs, you should do it as soon as possible. Once you get your vaccine, it takes about 2 weeks before you really benefit from its protection. So you don't want to wait this year. You should get it early.
Okay. And it looks like we have 3 different vaccines. What are the difference between the 3, and should someone be trying to get one over another?
Yeah, actually there's more than 3. There are 3 general types. There is a killed virus, that's a needle injection. There is what's called an attenuated virus, which is protein from the virus, not the whole thing. And then there is a live virus, which is the nasal spray. The nasal spray is only recommended in those ages 2 to 49, and it's not recommended for pregnant women. So if you are in that category, if you're over 49 or if you're pregnant, you should get the killed virus, which is an injection. Then in addition to those 3 main types, there is also a difference in the dose. There's a high dose vaccine that's recommended for folks who are 65 or older, and for people who have a weak immune system, either because of medication or because of some medical condition. So the best thing is to consult your primary caregiver, talk with them, and see which one would be best for you.
Okay, and you mentioned the medical conditions. I know there are other concerns that people also have, a common one being the egg allergy. If you have an egg allergy, should you get the flu shot?
Well, some of the flu vaccine is grown in eggs, and so if you have a severe allergy, like an anaphylactic severe allergic response, then you should avoid that. But there are 2 influenza vaccines. One is called Flu Block, and the other is called Flu Cell, and they are made without any exposure at all to eggs. So even if you have a severe egg allergy, there's still an influenza vaccine out there that you can safely take, and you should.
Okay, good advice. So the flu season is here. COVID never left. What is COVID looking like right now?
Well, Earlier in the summer, May and June, numbers were dropping and it was looking pretty quiet. We would sometimes go whole weeks without a new diagnosis in Montana. But now it's starting to tick up again. The last week, there were roughly 1,200 new cases diagnosed in Montana, and there were 2 deaths. And unfortunately, we are seeing in Europe especially that the numbers are starting to build up again. And we've kind of seen a little bit of a roller coaster in the last year. But it looks like the trend is upward, so that's worrisome.
We have new boosters out there now. Can you talk about those for us?
Sure. So what we learned over time is that after we got our first immunization set and our first booster, that people's immune response would start to wane a little bit. So both Pfizer and Moderna developed a new booster that is made up of 2 strains of the COVID virus. The original strain that we saw, and then also the Omicron 5, which now makes up about 80 to 85% of all the cases we're seeing. So it's called a bivalent, by referring to the fact that it's 2 different strains. And that's a new booster. It is more effective than the original vaccine, and so we're recommending that everybody get that.
Should I stick with the same brand of booster that I got my original shots and if I already have had a booster?
Yeah, they're so similar it really doesn't matter. It's okay to mix it. And there has been some problems with supply. So if you check with your pharmacy, it may be that they only have one or the other, but it's okay to mix them. It doesn't matter.
Okay, and what about mixing flu shot and COVID booster? Can I do that?
You absolutely can, and especially in states that we serve, like Montana and Wyoming and Alaska and Hawaii, sometimes people have to travel quite a ways to a place where they can get the vaccine, so it's more efficient to go ahead and get caught up on all of the vaccines that you need at the same time. That's perfectly safe, and it doesn't interfere with the effectiveness at all. So I encourage people to get all the shots they need all at one time.
Perfect. And we're almost out of time, but where can people get those shots?
Well, they're widely available in primary care clinics. Most county health departments have it, and most pharmacies have it. Probably the most convenient thing is to go to your nearest pharmacy, check with them. It's a good idea to call ahead. You don't really need an appointment, but it helps them out if they know you're coming. So it's a good idea to call ahead, make sure they have the vaccine, and get a time to go do it.
Thank you, Dr. Kunzweiler. We are up against a break, so we need to pause here. But when we come back, we'll talk about some other viruses that need our attention. Stay with us. We'll be right back after these messages. Welcome back. We're still talking with Dr. Doug Kunzweiler, and we're going to talk a little bit more about COVID here, Dr. K. So for those people who have still not gotten vaccinated, what is still going on there? What are the reasons, and what does the science say about those reasons?
Well, the reasons are sort of all across the board. There's still people who don't trust the vaccine, who feel that it was developed too quickly, that we don't have enough experience with it. And there are those who still think that there's something nefarious about it, that it's a government plot and that sort of thing. What the science says is, as we knew 2 years ago, they are very effective, some of the most effective vaccines that we have, and they're very safe. The worldwide experience now is that literally hundreds of millions of people have been vaccinated, and very, very few significant problems. So they're safe, they're effective. People don't want to get sick, and the best way to protect themselves is to get vaccinated.
Okay, and people can get the flu and COVID at the same time. Is that right? What does that look like? Yeah,
that does happen. It isn't real common, but mostly because we had a slow influenza season the last 2 years. But a recent study was published in a British journal called The Lancet, and they looked specifically at people who had both influenza and COVID at the same time. And as you might predict, those people were much sicker than people who only had influenza or only had COVID, and their mortality rate was about double. It was significantly higher.
Wow.
So it's a bad thing. We're worried that we might see more of that with a higher influenza season this year. So we are very much urging people to get vaccinated against both.
Okay, and I want to move on and talk about some other viruses, but first, any other final thoughts you want to make sure people hear about flu or COVID?
Yeah, I think I get the impression people feel like COVID is over, and the truth is it isn't. So it's still out there, it's still killing people, it's still making people miserable, still causing a lot of missing work, and you also have the risk of long-term symptoms, so I strongly urge people to get vaccinated against it.
Okay. It seems like we can't have this conversation without mentioning monkeypox. It's out there. It seems like it's at a little bit of a distance from us, though, but what is it and how does it spread?
Well, it has kind of an unfortunate name. It's not particularly common in monkeys, but it's a virus. It is related to the smallpox virus. It is carried by other mammals, mostly rodents, so rats, mice, gophers. It causes fever, muscle aches, headache, and a particular blistering rash that looks a lot like chicken pox or even smallpox, and it is related to smallpox. It has a very low mortality rate, so it's not killing people, but it lasts for a couple of weeks, 3 to 4 weeks, and the rash is quite painful, so it's kind of a miserable thing to have. It is affecting mostly young people. It can affect anybody, but what our experience has been so far is it's mostly young people, mostly in urban centers. Men who have sex with men seem to be having the most difficulty, probably because of the way it's spread. It's spread by skin-to-skin contact, but also by cough and sneeze and maybe even just talking. It's fairly easily transferred. So I would say right now, here in our rural states, we should be aware of it. We should keep our eyes open. If we think we're at high risk, we should talk to our primary caregiver because you can be vaccinated against this. But right now it isn't a huge concern. Certainly nothing like COVID or influenza.
Okay. Is there a vaccine?
Yeah, the vaccine is actually the smallpox vaccine. Now, smallpox was considered controlled worldwide in the 1970s, and so in America, we stopped vaccinating against smallpox. That was in about 1972. However, after 9/11, there was some worry that terrorists might weaponize smallpox because it was still being grown in laboratories and studied in laboratories around the world. So there was concern that could be captured and weaponized. So the American military started immunizing again against smallpox. And so a new vaccine was developed. It's called Imvanex. It's much cleaner than the old smallpox vaccine, and it is about 85% effective against monkeypox.
Okay, great. Let's switch gears and talk about pneumonia now. There isn't really a pneumonia season, right? So when does someone get vaccinated against pneumonia?
Yeah, the recommendation is, and we're talking about bacterial pneumonia, and in particular streptococcal pneumonia, which is a particular type of bacteria that is responsible for most of the bacterial pneumonias. It's recommended that at age 65 you become vaccinated against that. Now you should talk with your physician because people who have some chronic illnesses like chronic lung disease or chronic heart disease, or maybe they have a weakened immune system because of cancer or because of a medication they're taking, they might require the pneumonia vaccine even earlier. But in general, 65 and older, you should get immunized against streptococcal pneumonia.
Okay, and we talked about getting all of those shots together. I assume pneumonia, you can throw it on top, but should people be worried about side effects?
No. If you think about it, and this is what I tell people, as we walk around day to day, we don't like to think about this, but we are constantly exposed to viruses and bacteria and fungi and mold. We're sort of bombarded all day long with these. And our immune system can handle that. It has a different response for each germ, and it can do it all simultaneously. And so getting immunized for half a dozen germs at the same time is perfectly fine. Our bodies are used to dealing with that, and it works fine. And the side effects are a sore arm, maybe feeling a little achy or under the weather or tired for a day or two, but nothing worse than that.
Okay. Well, it's time for another break, so we're going to pause again here, but we're going to talk about how serious can these viruses get, and how do all these viruses piling on top of each other treat our healthcare professionals. We're going to talk about them. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Thanks for staying with us, and Dr. Kunzweiler has also stayed with us, and thank you also. So, Dr. Kunzweiler, let's talk about some of the complications and the risks, and let's start with flu. How serious can flu get?
Serious enough to kill you, so I guess that's fairly serious.
Yeah, pretty serious.
The things we worry about most, that we see most commonly, are of course pneumonia, because influenza primarily attacks the airways. So you can get a bacterial pneumonia on top of the influenza because the influenza weakens your body's defenses, and that can be quite serious. But we can see other problems too, like heart problems. Heart attacks and strokes are more common if you have influenza. We can see inflammation of the brain, inflammation of the liver, the kidneys, so it can be a pretty significant illness.
What about COVID-19 and the complications there? What are we seeing? Obviously, that's also one that can kill you.
And the complications are basically the same, but to a higher degree. The mortality rate, that is how many people die if they get influenza, is somewhere around 0.5%, which doesn't sound like very much, but these diseases spread so quickly and so many people get them that the numbers pile up. In a bad flu season, it's not uncommon to see 20 to 50,000 deaths nationwide from influenza. COVID is about twice that, somewhere between 1% to 2% mortality rate. And again, that adds up pretty quickly. So since we first had COVID in the United States, we've had somewhere around 92 million cases diagnosed. And out of those, a little over 1 million people, about 1,050,000 people have died of COVID. So these are not trivial diseases. This is not the common cold. These are diseases that have significant complications and a significant mortality rate.
And let's throw pneumonia in the mix now. What are the complications there, and how does the pneumonia mortality rate compare to flu and COVID?
Yeah, so it depends a little bit on semantics. Pneumonia is sort of an umbrella term that covers all infections of the lung. But if we're talking about streptococcal pneumonia, which is the one you can be immunized against, and it really is the most common severe pneumonia we see, the mortality rate there is around 7-8%. And that's an average. It's significantly higher than that in people who are over 65 or people who have other chronic illnesses. So it can be quite bad.
Let's talk about healthcare professionals and our healthcare providers. They have gotten hammered over the last couple of years with everything going on. And now with flu season here, and it is supposed to be a not good one. What do you think the fallout from all of this is going to be?
Well, what we saw with COVID was our healthcare workers, particularly nurses, but physicians as well, just were overworked, overstressed. When you looked at the emergency departments around the country, they were simply packed. And it was difficult to take care of people who had something other than COVID because there were so many COVID cases jamming up the system. That people who were having heart attacks and strokes and the usual emergencies had trouble getting care in a timely fashion. So we're quite worried that that might happen again. And compounding it, a lot of healthcare professionals left the field because they got so fatigued and so discouraged by taking care of all these people, many of whom were sick because they refused to get vaccinated. Yeah. And it just wore on them, and many have left the field. So we have a smaller work staff and possibly a worse winter coming.
So as patients, what can we do? Obviously, we need these healthcare providers, especially the few now that are left. So how can we help? How can we not take these folks for granted?
Well, I think the best thing you can do is get yourself immunized. Protect yourself so that you're not one of the people that's jamming up the system. And you know, we saw a lot of things like people refusing to believe or arguing over whether or not they really had COVID or whether or not COVID was even real. And that just isn't helpful. So get your immunization. I urge people to have a primary care provider that they can go to first to take care of things that don't require hospitalization, and follow your primary care provider's advice.
The biggest issue there is probably misinformation, right? People are getting different information depending on where they go or who they're listening to. So what are some reliable sources where people can get information about the viruses and about the vaccines?
Yeah. Again, your primary care provider is one of your better sources. Your local county health department is a really good resource to find out about what immunizations you need and where they are available. I hate to bring up the internet because it's a double-edged sword, because that has been the source of a lot of disinformation and misinformation and downright lies. But there are good resources. If you look at reliable things like the Mayo Clinic website, you can get good solid advice. Johns Hopkins, which is a big medical center, the Cleveland Clinic, those are all websites that contain a lot of good advice. Your local health department will have a footprint in the web that will give you good advice. The Center for Disease Control, the World Health Organization, all of these are professionals who have dedicated their whole lives to fighting infectious disease, and those are the resources that you should be looking at.
We have about a minute left, Dr. K, but I want to get into what people need to be doing. We're getting into the holiday season, lots more get-togethers and parties. What should we be doing this year?
Well, we should be getting immunized.
Right. Loud and clear.
And then we should be just using common sense, doing everything in moderation. Make sure you get plenty of rest. Make sure you stay hydrated. I'm not saying be abstinent, but moderate your alcohol intake, and then you can enjoy your family.
Okay, well, the clock has ticked down on us as always. Any final thoughts?
I like to tell people that immunization is natural medicine. All we do with immunizations is we convince our immune system, our own immune system, to fight a germ that it hasn't actually seen yet. There are various different safe ways of doing that. That's all we do with immunizations. It's natural medicine, and it's the best way to keep yourself healthy.
Perfect. You always give such great advice. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And thank you so much for joining us. We hope you'll come back and see us again next weekend. Until then, stay fit, stay well, and stay healthy for life with Healthy Living for Life. Have a great week, everybody.
Healthy Living for Life is brought to you by Mountain Pacific Quality Health in partnership with AARP Montana. We'd love to hear from you. If you have suggestions for future programs, visit our website at mpqhf.org or call us at 406-443-4020. You can also catch us on YouTube by visiting our website and clicking on the Healthy Living for Life logo. Production facilities provided by Video Express Productions.